Dateline, February 2022. Vladimir Putin visits China to celebrate the start of the Winter Olympics. While there, he and President Xi Jinping announced that the two countries share a limitless friendship. Later that month, Russia invades Ukraine. China then consummates that limitless friendship by providing Russia with absolutely no lethal aid for the war effort, until now, or maybe not. Watch your fingers, because we're about to dive in. And that reminds me, today's video is sponsored by Surfshark. More on them in a minute. For now, we head to May 2024 and the beginning of this ongoing drama. UK Defence Secretary Grant Shapps told attendees at a conference in London that the United Kingdom has evidence that Russia and China are collaborating on combat equipment for use in Ukraine. Washington was apparently confused by the revelation. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told reporters that the White House had not seen that information to date, and that he looked forward to speaking with UK intelligence to make sure that they had a common operating picture. In case this was not clear, that last bit is 100% grade A diplomatic shade. China, meanwhile, also denied the accusation. Of course, breaking news, leaders lie. But Zelensky apparently believes it. He says, she says that it is not happening. And more than a month later, no one else has confirmed Shapps' claims. So, what the heck is going on here? Well, today, let's cover three options. 1, he was wrong. 2, he was right, if you think about it in a certain way. And 3, something more nefarious is going on. China is doing it in secret, and the West wants to keep it that way. We will spend most of our time on the third option, because it is the most interesting. But understanding that requires going through the other two bits first. Let's begin with option 1 because it is the simplest. It is possible that the intelligence that Shapps cited was wrong. Perhaps after Sullivan's diplomatic shade-throwing, British intelligence officials indeed compared notes with their American and other Western counterparts. This does happen in the intelligence world. It is possible, for example, that Britain had a lone source, say this shady character here, who's always up to no good, and that the United States knew was not credible. Then US intelligence officials explained why that was the case to Britain, and so the whole thing simply ended. Afterward, the whole story quietly died off, so as to not bring extra embarrassment to any of the parties involved. In sum, this explanation is straightforward enough. Just ignore the shady guy. And Surfshark, the sponsor of today's video, has some good news there. Unfortunately, sometimes you can't just ignore the shady guy. You might be minding your own business online, but shady guy over here is tracking your IP address, and now you're just handing over your approximate location. That's where Surfshark VPN comes in. It reroutes everything through its own servers, leaving the shady guy lost in a sea of Surfshark IP. But VPNs are dynamic tools that do a whole lot more than that. Let me give you a recent example from my life. A friend's parents were in town and needed to check what was happening with their pensions. Easy enough. No, not easy enough. They needed to be in India to access the webpage. So, option 1, they fly back to India. Or option 2, they use my VPN to surf from India, and boom, now they can see their money. So if you want to surf like a shark, go to surfshark.deals/William Spaniel and use code William Spaniel, all one word, for an extra 4 months free. The deal comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so what are you waiting for? Go there today. Back to focusing on China. The second possibility is that Shapps' statement was kind of true. Alternatively, we could title this segment Dual-Use Technology, because Shapps may have been overclaiming the dual-use assistance that China publicly provides to Russia. Rewinding a second, the public position that China has taken with the invasion is a willingness to profit from it, but not to encourage it. We covered this in depth a year ago, but the basic logic here is that Beijing gets very nervous about non-consensual changes to territorial recognition. This is an artifact of the One China philosophy, the idea being that if Donetsk and Luhansk can unilaterally leave Ukraine, then it creates geopolitical precedent for Taiwan to do something similar by declaring itself independent. And if there is anything at all that the PRC does not want, it is that. This explains the mixed voting record that China has cast within the United Nations on the topic of the invasion. Meanwhile, There's also concern in Beijing that Russia will grind itself into oblivion by fighting over Ukraine, which China does not directly care about. That then will leave Beijing without a functional partner should there be a broader war with the West. Not good news for the world's second most populous country. But Moscow is getting some help. You see, money is money, and that is why China is willing to import Russian oil at a significant discount. Still, there are limits to that. China's refusal to reach an agreement to build a new natural gas pipeline shows this. The tricky point here that may connect to Shapps' comment is regarding those dual-use items. Dual-use technology is anything that has both civilian and military applications. Microchips are the primary example coming out of the current war. Take a moment to look around you and count the number of things that contain microchips. Basically everything does. Phones, watches. If you bought a new car within the last few years, I have news for you. You actually bought a computer with 4 wheels. As a result, world leaders care a lot about them. You see, microchips are also essential in any modern military hardware that goes beyond a straightforward rifle. Long gone are the days of simple tanks with a basic engine to run everything. Now is the era of computers assisting humans to increase efficiency. You can calculate where to aim your artillery, but it is much easier and faster to just let a computer do it. In sum, microchips are everywhere. Recognizing their ubiquity and military importance, the Kremlin attempted to create a domestic semiconductor industry. However, Russian businesses struggled to compete in that market. Heck, just about everyone outside of Taiwan struggles to compete in that market. Now, it is no secret that Beijing is selling chips to Moscow, whether manufactured at home or imported into China and then exported into Russia. With that in mind, it is possible that Shapps was referring to an unpublished report that showed that China was indeed exporting microchips to Russia, knowing full well that Russia was going to use them on weapons production. And we all know where those weapons are going. Indeed, this has been a central concern for the State Department's mission in China for months now. Between the ambassador and secretary getting a delicious bite to eat on the streets of Shanghai, yum, and attending a CBA playoff game between the Golden Bulls and the Sharks, the Sharks, that is a coincidence, their attention has turned not to direct weapon sales, but rather Russia acquiring 70% of its machine tools and 90% of its microelectronics from China. And if China knows that Russia is doing this to build its defense base, then there is some level of complicity here. Obviously, that would be a slight break from the strict interpretation of Beijing's de facto policy of make money and do not encourage the Kremlin. But it should not come as a shock to Western observers that this process continues. It all goes back to a basic problem in Russia. Russia's civilian industry also needs microchips, and it is basically impossible to monitor what happens to those chips once they cross the border. The West is also not enthusiastic about this, but those governments understand the difficulty of the problem. And really, it is up to the Western sanctions regime to figure out how to stop it. It is not Beijing's task unless the West provides the proper pressure on China. Otherwise, China is perfectly happy to wash its hands of the situation. Speaking of which, the United States stepped up those efforts heading into the June G7 summit. And note that entities in Turkey and the United Arab Emirates were also part of that, meaning that this problem is not strictly confined to the allies of Russia. Thus, you get rather indifference to Shapps' suggestion that China is providing lethal aid. Everyone already knows that it is happening, but dual-use technology does not quite count. Finally, we get to the intriguing option, something more nefarious, or that Shapps actually had accurate intelligence, but the West wants to suppress it so as to not induce China to double down. This is a topic that my self-respecting academic alter ego has worked on before. Fun fact, I had an alternative title to this article. It was Doubling Down: The Dangers of Disclosing Discreet Deeds, but I chickened out because I was an untenured coward at the time. Anyway, imagine that you are a country thinking about taking some sort of national security action. Broadly, you can choose from 3 options: do nothing, Do it publicly, and do it secretly. In a vacuum, the trade-off between public and secret action is power versus blowback. Go public, and you can do everything en masse. No need to try to cover your tracks. All of the semiconductors, all day, every day. Keeping everything secret, on the other hand, means that third parties will not be able to chastise you in international fora for what you are doing. So, no negative media publicity, no economic sanctions, no blowback. And if you think about the countries that are publicly giving Russia lethal aid, we are talking about Iran and North Korea here, a main reason that they are not covering their tracks is because they were already incurring the wrath of the West. Okay, not covering their tracks is an understatement. They are openly celebrating the relationship. Hugs all around. But that does not happen without the insulation of being pre-sanctioned. But for China, the trade-off between power and blowback is more complicated than this pomp and circumstance. And North Korean beach balls? In the secretive cases, the third parties may uncover the plot, and that is when the game truly begins. Exposure seems like the obvious response. The revealed party gets named and shamed, which then causes them to withdraw. And if the perpetrator preferred secret action to no action to now public action, that is indeed true, but not so fast. There is no guarantee that this is always the true ordering of the key actor. Rather, it might be that they prefer public action to no action. Here, by taking secret action off of the table, publicizing the plot just induces the opposing country to double down on its position. Go from discreetly shipping one microchip at a time to sending them by the truckload in open sight of everyone involved. With the cat out of the bag, the country is stuck suffering international condemnation either way. As a result, you can forget about the half measure. Might as well go with the full measure at that point. For example, the United States' assistance to Mujahideen rebels during the Soviet-Afghan War is well known today. Named Operation Cyclone, those efforts helped dislodge the Soviet Union from the country, giving the Kremlin a significant political black eye. But what is less well known is how those actions started in secret. There was an elaborate plan to only give the Mujahideen Soviet weapons, ironically enough. How? Well, the United States sourced from stockpiles that Israel captured during the Yom Kippur War, and via excess legacy weapons that Egypt was looking to pawn. Afterward, Washington laundered everything through Pakistan. Over time, the Soviet Union realized what was happening, and tried to expose Washington's plot for the Kremlin's benefit. The thinking in the Kremlin was that the White House did not want to be seen as trying to manipulate the affairs of a Central Asian nation, and thus once the actions were brought to light, the White House would terminate its support. That plan backfired. Instead, with the assistance now being an open secret, the United States began supplying Stinger missiles. Stingers were brand new at the time. They only could have come directly from Washington, and thus the Kremlin would know exactly what was happening. Nevertheless, the United States switched to a de facto public intervention. But it was an easy choice given the earlier exposure. Zooming out, the central lesson here is that it is sometimes better to keep the opposing state secret rather than expose what is going on. Indeed, that is the strategy that Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser took in the late 1960s. At the time, the United Kingdom was secretly providing support operations to North Yemen in response to Egypt deploying 70,000 soldiers to fight in the ongoing civil war there. And yes, this is the correct Egyptian flag, even though it is now Syria's flag. But that is a long story for another day. Anyway, they called it Operation Rancor, which, thanks to George Lucas, is much harder to ask AI about than it should be. On the other hand, a really good job from Google here. Regardless, Nasser eventually deduced what was going on, but he kept his cards close to his chest. In fact, this was a wise decision. The British foreign policy establishment had already discussed escalating to more forceful public actions if its role were ever exposed. It is possible that something like that might be happening today. Western intelligence may have indeed already discovered that China has supplied lethal aid to Russia. Thus, Shaps was speaking the truth. But the whole thing has been kept quiet because they are wagering that exposure will not deter China. On the contrary, once the secret is out in the open, there will be no need for Beijing to constrain its assistance. The endgame is that China, the collective West, and Ukraine are all worse off than in a world where they had colluded to keep the secret. Of course, secrets have a hard time staying in the shadows forever. We may eventually learn that China has long been deeply involved in the war. And if that happens, we will have to look back at this video, see whether the secret was kept out of fear that China would expand its operations, and then wait and see whether indeed China escalates further. Thanks again to Surfshark for sponsoring today's video. And if you want to know more about the invasion, you can check out my books on the subject. See the video description for more information about them. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.